Welcome everybody who was able to make it. My name is Chris. This is the Red Triangle in honor of May Day Labor Talk. We're titling it Current State of Labor Movement. We have a pretty good mixture of speakers. Full disclosure, we are missing one. We're expecting them to toddle in sometime shortly, hopefully, but we like to keep a good schedule. So I will allow our panelists who are here to introduce themselves, and when our third gets here, we'll let him do it too. I'll start with Grace.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. We are now dear and close friends after chit-chatting a little bit. My name is Grace Heffernan. I'm with the Northeast Ohio Worker Center. If it is appropriate, maybe I could share a little bit about what the Worker Center is.
Of course.
And does? Okay. So worker centers exist across the country. They are born out of the kind of traditional labor movement and are really a recognition of the fact that most working people will not work in an organized workplace. Of course, that is a North Star. That is something that we want for everyone. But something like only 10% of workplaces are organized today. And so what does everyone else do when they're having workplace issues? And so worker centers really developed as a way to build power in non-unionized workplaces and throughout our communities. So our worker center is here in Northeast Ohio. We've been around for about 4 years. We do sort of two things. We offer like material relief services. So if you have an issue at work, if you're not getting paid everything you're owed, you think you're being discriminated against, you want to ask for better work conditions, we can help you with all of those things. And then we also like to organize, and that can look like big community organizing campaigns like anti-wage theft legislation that we worked on with Deb and Jobs with Justice, or it can look like helping workers organize their workplaces for better work conditions. And certainly if we mean union organizing, we would hand that off to one of our union partners, but there's a lot of things you can do before that stage to help make your workplace better. So that's the Worker Center, and that's me.
Over to Deb.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon, actually. I'm Deb Kline. I'm the director of Cleveland Jobs with Justice. And I'm coming at this today with two hats on, because not only am I the director of Cleveland Jobs with Justice, but I'm also the president of a very small union. And I say very small compared to like SEIU and all the other ones that everybody is familiar with. We have 249 members in our local. So as I said, I come at this from two different angles. Cleveland Jobs with Justice is a coalition of labor, faith, and community organizations. I oftentimes describe us as the street heat of the labor movement. So if something is going south at a workplace organizing campaign or a contract campaign or anything for the unions, then the crazy people can go out and protest out in front of whatever. So that's basically what we do, and it's a lot of fun. I always say, where else can you be paid to be a hellraiser? So I enjoy the work. The union work is good as well, but so as I said, I'm coming at this from two different perspectives.
Fabulous. Just as heads up, this is not a talk at you, a talk with you. So if people have questions as we're going, something sparks a thought, raise your hand, I'll recognize you, and then we'll come back to you when there's a break. I do have a list of questions to start us off, so we're going to start with question one. We've seen a lot in the news about some union successes lately, notably an auto factory, I think it was a Volkswagen factory that just unionized, and we've seen some, like even an Amazon warehouse and things like this, but statistically we're aware that union membership is actually falling in the States. What challenges do we see that are preventing unionization and a larger labor movement?
I can tell you in the state of Ohio, it's 13% unionization. So yes, we're way lower than what we used to be. And I think it's because people really do not understand what unions do and how we provide for the workers. You know, coming at this again from Cleveland Jobs with Justice, give me an issue and I can somehow tie it to a worker issue. But I also think that a lot of people don't understand what the role of a union is, and so that's what we as labor leaders have to do, is to make sure that people understand that. Because some people will say, well, what difference does it make? And it's like, well, okay, Ohio is an at-will state. If you're not under a union contract, if you blink incorrectly at the boss, they can fire you. So, and what they'll do, they'll come back with some trumped-up labor charge. Under a union contract, you have just cause, and they have to follow the terms of the contract. So I think that a lot of people really need to understand the benefits, and so the labor community needs to do a little better job of letting people know what we do.
Deb's not wrong. I could offer to be clear, the Worker Center, we are not a union, and I am not coming at this from two hats like Deb. But I think, like, from an outsider's perspective, I see a few things. I think organized labor is under constant attack. And often I think we think that attack comes from, the conservative right, but honestly, it comes from our allies on the left as well. I'll give an example. Here in Cleveland, the Cleveland Port Authority, believe it or not, the Port Authority has nothing to do with water. It is a financing mechanism for public dollars to be used for development. It's a really important tool that has historically offered prevailing wage jobs, both for building trades, but also for service industry work on those job sites. And so the board of the Port Authority, which is made up of nonprofit executives, public servants, and electeds in a majority Democratic county, much less the city, voted to remove prevailing wage requirements from any Port Authority funded project. And so that's an example, right, where the value of a union is being undermined by the very folks who are supposed to, and a lot of times, protect the union. So I guess that would be one thing I would talk about, just like this constant siege that organized labor is under, and how diligent we have to be as supporters, even among our own ranks, in making sure that when we are in spaces that are not openly pro-labor, like nonprofit spaces, like, I'm thinking like even philanthropy spaces. I don't know how everyone comes to this work, but yeah, like, like kind of voicing some of that, and like not being afraid to keep our lives separate. So that's the one thing. And then another thing I would talk about, misclassification. So I also think there's this thing happening in our labor market where working people are not actually being considered employees anymore. So I'm sure most of you are aware of like Instacart and Uber and Lyft, but it's creeping into all industries, healthcare, manufacturing. You have workers who 15 years ago would have been employees of companies who are now contract workers. That allows workplaces to do a couple of things. One, it fissures, right, the employment from who's your boss, right? It makes you your own boss. So you no longer have the right to organize. So you have huge swaths of our economy that are no longer given employment status, that are being classified as contractors and cannot be driving this engine of organized labor. And so I guess those would be the few things that I see. It's just like this like constant siege, and then our labor market is under attack, and working people don't even have the protections to unionize anymore. And I could talk about that at length, so I'm gonna breathe and I'm gonna stop.
And I actually have a follow-up as
Yes,
well. The other issue is that oftentimes who we perceive as our champions and people who believe in what we do, and they will until there's a union organizing campaign, if they're like the executive director or the head of an organization or an entity. I will tell you, the one that really ticked me off was the Southern Poverty Law Center. We all know the Southern Poverty Law Center. We all know the good work that they've done. They fought unionization. And I used to be a monthly donor to the Southern Poverty Law Center until that. And then even when I called and said, hey, I'm going to end my donation, my monthly, and I said, and this is why. And the person on the other end just said, okay, and hung up. So somebody that you would expect to be an ally wasn't. And I will tell you that we have that here locally as well. I at the moment can't mention, but we have that here locally as well. So it's unfortunate.
Since this is a talk with and not a talk at, do folks have other ones that we didn't mention that you think of?
Other
just other examples of why, despite the real interest in union organizing, that the numbers are still declining.
Oh, uh, so, I mean, this is anecdote, but like a few years before I joined my current workplace, which I'm not going to mention, there was a union vote and it got rejected. And, you know, as somebody who is very pro-union, I grew up in a union household, I have very often and vocally said, man, we really need a union here. And I've heard my colleagues spew, I mean, basically the boss's line. Like they repeat back what they heard. They really absorbed what the boss's lines were. So they were healthcare, and I've heard other healthcare workers say, I don't want a garbage person negotiating for me because they believe that they're, as a healthcare worker, somehow superior to. So this like, they're feeding, you know, oh, you're better than other people. You don't need a union. You're a professional. And like reinforcing the stratification of society, which is nonsense and also like, you know, practically incorrect. We know that unions use professional negotiators and lawyers to do that work, not, you know. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of like misconceptions about unions and what they do and how they operate, which I guess could bump us down into the next question. Not the next question, but we're going to skip around a bit. You know, misconceptions about unions. What the things, some of the common stuff that you hear is that they protect bad workers and so on and so forth. And these are really just parroting of like the boss's line. What other misconceptions would people want to talk about?
Well, that's it. I mean, you can almost hear management coming out of their mouths because this is what they've heard, and so they're going to repeat it, and that's what they think, which is unfortunate. So it's up to us as labor to re-educate people. I will tell you, this just happened a year ago. There's a union here in town. Grace knows which one, but she's not going to say. There is a union here in town who's busted my union. A union busted my union, and they just tried it again a year ago. And when it happened, I sent a cease and desist essentially to their organizer or their negotiator that I was dealing with, but then also sent it to all of our current members, because what the union did is said, you get rid of OPEIU, and then you can become a member of our union. You'll still get the benefits of our union. However, they would not be under a contract. So I sent them all a letter, an email with the copy of the cease and desist, because what he was doing against us was, we could have filed a charge at the NLRB, and I know the NLRB is a question as well. But I decided I didn't want to pursue it, but I would talk to the members. And as soon as I said, you better check to make sure that you're going to have a contract, that you're going to be covered, because if you don't, you will now become an at-will employee. That means the boss can fire you at any time. Well, guess what? Once they realized what they would be giving up, fortunately for them, they came back and said, never mind, we'll stay as OPEIU members. So, but I mean, that's also something that we have to fight. Sometimes it feels like we're fighting one another, and we shouldn't be doing that.
So one thing, and this is not heavy-handed criticism, but one thing that I know as somebody who is not in the labor movement himself, because his workplace is not, something that can contribute to sort of the opacity of like people outside looking in is all of the acronyms. OPEIU, SEIU, ACL, no, that's not one. So like, you know, I think just as a matter of practicality, especially for our discussion today, if people would at least say the first time you use an acronym what it stands for and you know who that union represents, I think that would be helpful.
It's Office Professional Employees International Union. So I will try to remember to do that.
Thanks. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. You just touched on something that I feel so deeply about, which is you said I don't consider myself a part of the labor movement. And like that like hits home for me, and I think that when we think about like misconceptions about the labor movement, it's like who's the labor movement for and who is the labor movement. And I think we are at this like really special time where the definition of like who is a part of the labor movement is seeming broader, like to encompass supporters and agitators and champions and folks who host events like this so we can learn about the labor movement. So I would encourage you and all of us to consider ourselves part of the labor movement. Certainly unionized workplaces are a very special and particular part of the labor movement, but I think as working people, it takes all of us. And so I often think that's part of like the internalized crap that we're all fed, that like we aren't workers in some way, that if we reach a certain part in our careers or we're doing certain types of work or taking care of our family in a certain type of way, that like working class issues are not our issues and therefore we are not a part of any sort of like worker-led movement. And so I would encourage all of us to be a part of the labor movement. And then the other thing is, so the Worker Center, we go and do Know Your Rights trainings, like workplace Know Your Rights trainings for all sorts of groups. But one of the groups we go to is, it's called Towards Employment. They help individuals who have basically are leaving the criminal justice system to get into employment. And we always talk about your right in the workplace to use your voice, you know, to collectively organize. And there are so many misconceptions about unions, and in particular, who are union members. And I think folks think of, and I say this lovingly, older white men in the trades, maybe like manufacturing. They think of dirty jobs. They think of like the shop floor. Honestly, they think of like coal miners. These are all like the legacy of the labor movement, and we have so much, we owe so much to those folks who built the labor movement. But today's labor movement is totally different. It is something like, I wrote down a couple statistics. It's like 40% people of color. There's over 50% women. There's over 50% like younger workers, so between the ages of like 20 to 50. And so like the labor movement is really this like beautiful, diverse group of working people who are working in the service sector, who are working in professional work, like Deb organizes. And so I think that's like a huge misconception. And I also think sometimes people think the labor movement is antithetical to racial justice. And the reality is that like the best thing you can do to close racial disparities in the workplace is to have a collective bargaining agreement. And so like really, I guess to answer that question, I think the misconception there is really about like the racial justice and labor justice being somehow separate from one another.
There's another, I want to add one other thing. And I oftentimes hear this from my own membership. They say, the union. You are the union. And that's exactly what I say back to them. So for some reason, they haven't thought about the fact that they are the union. I'm not the union, you are the union. Yes, I am in the union, but you have to remember that we're all in this together. So that's another thing that we face a lot of times is we have to get our membership well educated. I'm constantly putting out everything I put out to our membership, even people that have been around for years. I always put out everything I send out. It's OPEIU, Local 1794. Why do I do that? Because go ask union members what their local is, and sometimes they can't even tell you. Yeah. So I think we have to educate our members as well.
So that somewhat leads me into the next thing here. So we hear sort of that like unions at one time were very powerful and useful, and they definitely built a lot of like good things for working people, but they aren't so needed anymore. And how would we kind of respond to that?
Because you would lose it all unless we had the unions. I mean, you got to think about everything that the unions have done for us. 40-hour work week, overtime, every labor right that you have came from the union movement. And if unions went away, we may be small, but we're mighty. And I would just see things going backward. I mean, they're talking about child labor now. I mean, it's crazy. So I think we would just go backwards, big time.
Yeah.
You can see what happened where the negotiated Big Three last year.
the sort of the old, the rising tide lifts all ships kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. This is okay. So speaking of like breaking down the labor movement, maybe everyone knows this thing that you're talking about, but I just learned this. So I maybe will expound and you would tell me if I get it right or not. Okay, so big unions like have factions within them, right? Like there is just like any family, right? The cousins sit at the cousins table, the kids are at the kids table, like, and so within UAW there was, it's called the democracy faction, the democracy.
It's, yeah, it is. It's
Yeah.
United Auto Workers for Democracy.
Yeah, and so this group like has existed for a long time, but when the graduate students all joined UAW, if you remember that big surge back in, what was that, 2019, 2018, like really the ranks were filled out of UAWD and allowed for this push of this very progressive faction of the UAW, which was headed by Sean Fain, to like, you know, move into leadership, something that until recently had been unheard of. They also, I think, were like investigated by the federal government for some corruption. I think that also helped speed up the change as well.
But almost just as important is the one number, one vote. They did not have
Yes.
they fought to get that back, and that they were able to use the corruption issue, the investigation as leverage, or the leverage point for.
And I'm not 100% sure. Now I don't think it is United Auto Workers. It's the acronym is different. It's somebody that's not up here speaking. Can you Google that? Yeah, I don't, because it would be too close to the United Auto Workers. So I think it's United. It's something along those.
All workers, United All Workers.
United All Workers for Democracy. There you go. Is that there's
Same acronym, but different words.
different
Yeah.
words?
Unite all workers.
Unite all workers,
Yeah.
right, yes. Yeah, it was funny because after I said that, I'm like, I don't think that's correct, so,
It was United Auto Workers for Democracy.
yeah.
Push came to shove.
Yeah, there's also the same with the Teamsters, there's TDU, Teamsters for Democratic Union, so.
Yeah, and this has blown my mind. So we're really going off. We're in another place now. But again, like thinking about like who is the labor movement and are we a part of it? Like I feel like I've only identified in the last few years as a part of the labor movement, and I really did not understand how unions made decisions. I assumed that all union members got to vote, and that is very often not the case. And so when we think about like labor as a monolith or labor as, you know, this like progressive tool for good, it certainly is, but also all institutions like are a constant effort and work to make them better. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing about the labor movement, is that it is also trying to improve itself all the time.
So this might be continuing the derailment.
Yeah.
One thing I think, with that, the labor movement not being a monolith. So I think, I drove up here from Youngstown. In our local labor movements are heavily in manufacturing. A lot of the new manufacturing are not union shops, but there's a lot of like legacy places around. I've seen it both there, and then my mother is in a nurses union up in Michigan that doesn't do anything outside of healthcare because, well, they're auto workers. You know, the same thing, Chris, you mentioned of we are different. We are not in the same position. So, I mean, how do you, in that day-to-day, work on tearing down the correct? We are not a monolith. We are all different, but we are all on the same side working toward the same thing.
It's difficult. It really, and it's, again, I think it's just more of us educating us as labor leaders, educating our membership and making sure that they understand what we do and why we do it. Like, as I said, Office Professionals Employee International Union, we used to just represent office workers. And so there are different unions for different sectors. And I say used to because now we have helicopters pilots and we have orthopeds, and so we have we have nurses in Hawaii, actually. So some of the unions have kind of gone off and done other sectors. So I think that that's also a good thing. And I'll tell you, I'm from the Mahoning Valley. Well, my family's from the Mahoning Valley, but I live there and my sons went to school there. So I totally understand, and the union density down there has dropped significantly, which is unfortunate. Because we had Lordstown, we had other plants. A lot of people didn't realize there were other plants around Lordstown that were unionized. I think there were 3 of them that ended up closing because of that.
A lot of the support shops that made products for the assembly that aren't, whereas the people who were affected by Lordstown closing got to go to Spring Hill or Fort Wayne, keep their union membership. The supply shops just up and closed.
Yep.
So those people either if they left or stayed, just no longer most of the people.
Yeah, the backlash, because there are a lot of other little factories that supplied goods to Lordstown. Also, back in the day, there was Packard Electric, which ended up being Delphi Packard. But Packard Electric was also, they made the harnesses, the electric harnesses for Lordstown. Guess what happened? After the trade agreement, they moved to Mexico. The majority of the work went to Mexico. And that happened around the time my ex-husband was in El Paso, or was in the service, and we lived in El Paso. So I was there, and they were paying the workers 25 cents an hour. This was back in the late 70s, 25 cents an hour. But then at the time, because I looked it up and figured it out, the people at Packard here in Warren, at the time, were making $14.40. There's a huge difference between 25 cents an hour, and all they did was just contribute to the poverty in Juarez. So that's the other problem we've got, that companies will just move out.
Because I'm a big believer in bright spots and silver linings, with moving that work, one of the last things, I think it was UAW, it might have been 1714, I think, before the Lordstown plant closed. It was at the same time one of the Mexican factories where the Chevy Cruze had been moved to, is that factory in Mexico was trying to unionize. The local in Warren, wrote a letter of support and offered aid to that factory, even though all of that manufacturing in Warren had been moved to say you are still. So going back to all of the same folks.
Yeah.
Really, that should be the strategy. Leave no place on earth where they can move and not have a union. And unions that are established should be helping unionize India and Pakistan, and don't leave a place where the bosses can have a union-free workshop.
You talking about that just gave me goosebumps. So I went to Labor Notes, this conference, a couple weeks ago. I'm saying it here and now. Let's all go together in 2 years. We need our Cleveland contingent to be huge and awesome. It was such a great conference. There's these 2 guys. They're just wandering around, regular guys. There's a worker center breakout. There's 70 of us in a room. Everyone's passing the mic around. These 2 guys are the 2 union organizers of that Mexican factory, and they were there talking about the fact that American workers from the UAW funded their entire union drive. I seriously get goosebumps. The international solidarity, they wouldn't have been able to do it without the support of the local UAW here. Here meaning in the United States. And now they are the first unionized car manufacturer in Mexico. And these guys are just walking around this conference. I'm like, this is Sean Fain of Mexico. It was just so cool. So we should all go. You heard it here first. Buy your tickets.
I think that's an interesting shift too, because I recall, and I'm not going to sling too much mud, but I remember maybe 20 years ago or so, there was what was being called the low-wage workers union that was being organized in Cleveland, and the local unions stomped it and said, nope, you need to change the name to the Day Laborers Organizing Committee, because they didn't want them to be called a union. That has that has clearly shifted some if we're now helping to unionize plants in Mexico who were, for sure in the 80s looked at as the enemy. It was a very the us versus them mentality of the big labor unions here.
And I think the one thing that we always have to remember, it's the workers. We have to care about the workers. When there was the threat of the sanitation workers strike at the city, I was working with 507 and 860, Teamsters 507 and Laborers 860, and said, hey, you got to get out ahead of this. You got to start going to the community, because you know what happens if you go on strike? Everybody's going to be mad at the workers. And that's not who they need to be mad at. They need to be mad at management. So what I was able to do is connect them with a lot of different community groups so they could get the message out. And fortunately, it didn't happen, but I was like, we've got to get signs, we've got to get people, the community needs to be involved in this, because that always happens. When there's a strike, it's the workers' fault.
Deb, didn't you have a blow-up rat on the lawn of City Hall?
We actually had, we have the rat and we have the fat cat, and I have instant access to both of them. I don't have them personally, but yes, I can get them. And the other really cool thing with the Teamsters is their big truck, their semi. I mean, they bring that, when there's something going on, they make sure that everybody knows it's happening.
I was also just thinking while you were speaking about sort of the nurses union that is so insular. Last year, I think, it was the steel workers union that organized the adjunct professors at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, which it seems like way outside of the box, but they did it, and now those folks have a union to represent them.
So I work at in the philanthropy sector down in Youngstown. Me and a few coworkers have explored. You said a small union too, but we would be 8. Our office is tiny, and their recommendation was to go to the steel workers, even though we are doing some groundwork. We are white collar people. And like, go to the steel workers. We have a good relationship with them, because it's the NPE nonprofit professionals, nonprofit employees. They're also very small. They don't have to organize it capacity around. So
Yeah, I think that's like something we run into at the Worker Center. We have workers who come all the time and who are like, yeah, I would love to organize. And we've really struggled with like, who are the unions in town that have the capacity to organize? Because most of the time when someone comes with the idea to organize their shop, like they actually don't know what that means. There's a long way between getting from like a few people with an idea and like getting unionized. And like, it's so sad to me that so much of that like organizing muscle memory just doesn't exist. And so you do end up having these sort of odd couple pairings of workplaces that organize with folks you wouldn't typically suspect.
I want to kind of rein us in just a little bit, because we had some points that I really think are important to get to. So the next one was what we kind of touched on a little bit, but what is the National Labor Relations Board? What do they do, and what is the current state of it?
Well, actually, it's a lot better than it was because of it being under Trump, the higher up in the appointments. But it's the National Labor Relations Board. That's who we go to as unionizers or union people if there's a violation in the workplace. There could be bad faith bargaining if you're bargaining. There could be all kinds of different types of charges that you can file at the NLRB. I will tell you that I had a lot of action at the NLRB. We tried to organize a credit union down in Akron. We won the election. That's where you go if you want to file for an election. There are 2 ways of doing this. You file for an election, or you have recognition, which means the boss says, okay, there's enough of you that want to organize. We're not going to fight it. You don't have to go through the election process. But they do the elections. So that's our entity that we rely on. I will tell you, as I said, we had a really huge case there that we won. We won settlements for 6 people because they got fired because the management got rid of them when we won the election. So that I hope we don't lose everything. So that's our entity. That's who we go to. I call all of the different government entities that we work with for labor issues the alphabet soup, because we've got the NLRB, we've got the EEOC, we've got the DOL. And sometimes I will even tell a member if there's not a violation of the contract for a grievance, but if they still feel, if we need to go to the EEOC, we will, or the DOL. So Department of Labor and EEOC is Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So I always have to stop and think of that one.
I don't think I would add anything.
We had a question.
Is the NLRB only for union employees or
Anyone in the labor movement can, yeah. There's actually someone right now in Cleveland that has filed against one of the bad bosses. So yeah, you can go there and do that. About the what?
The case before the Supreme Court now, the Brooklyn law.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Hopefully it won't happen, but yeah, they want to do everything to prevent unions from unionizing more, so they're going to pull out everything they have in their bag of tricks. So.
Supposedly Starbucks is negotiating with people, but yet they're part of the suit.
Of course they are.
So they're playing both ends against the other.
And there's another one, because Starbucks, remember, I'm sure you all remember, when Starbucks first started, oh, we're this progressive coffee place. Yeah, okay, you're progressive only on certain issues maybe, but when it comes to protecting your workers, you really aren't so progressive. So you can always find the true colors of a company or a boss when you start talking about unionization.
I don't know. I mean, this probably is not I would say, it's like a presidential election year. I think it's worth saying that something that doesn't get a lot of discussion when thinking about like the top of the ticket is the rulemaking that happens at these federal agencies. And I would just say that like the USDOL, the Department of Labor, which is where most working people, if you have an issue at work, would go to, or the NLRB, these agencies can really operate in a democratic ecosystem in a way they just can't under Republicans. Like, they have their budgets slashed, the rules changed. I mean, and so like, I don't know why I even bring that up to say, but like, people ask me sometimes like, well, do you feel like anything's really different under this administration? And I would say, as a group that like regularly interfaces with these agencies, like the protections that working people have, the limited ones that we do have, are infinitely more accessible in the last 3 years than they were in the years before. So I don't know, do with that as you will, but I just like, I get nervous. We have folks who are interested. There's this deferred action program for undocumented workers, where if you have been a victim of a labor violation, you can get a work permit. It's essentially like DACA for adult workers. And the question that's out there is like, all of these folks that we've connected to this program, what happens to them if in November we get, a Trump or like whoever? And like, yeah, it's like, I don't know. It's like really heart-wrenching stuff. And I think it's going to force us to make some really tough decisions. And that's it. Deb, did I go out too far on a limb there? I don't know.
I will say that especially with the DOL, I have been a community organizer for 37 years. That's my job. And I've, with the different organizations. But I can never remember a time in my entire career where I've said, I love a government agency. But the DOL that we have in Ohio is a rock star. And the reason why I say that is because of the work that we do, excuse me, on immigration. We can call them if there's somebody that has a workplace violation, because that community is very difficult. It's very difficult to get them to step forward because of the fear of being deported. But the DOL, they write off, they'll say, we are not going to get in contact with any other agency. You can come to us, and they do. I mean, and even under Trump, we could still go to the DOL for worker protections. No, we do not have a State Department of Labor. No, it's called. No, no,
That'd be
we
a
do
very
not.
frightening
Ohio
place.
does not have a Department of Labor. It's and that's the problem here because a lot of our different agencies that are worker-driven agencies are in different places, but a lot of them are in the Ohio Department of Commerce. So, I'm saying that because I don't know how much I would trust. And I never tell anyone to go to the state. I always say, if you've got a workplace violation, go straight to the DOL. Because I have more faith in them than I do anything tied to the state.
This is going to be kind of a long question, but I'm going to move on. The late 90s, early 2000s, there was this thing, the anti-globalization movement, which, among other things, also was noted for having this commonality between, like, labor unions. For example, they said Teamsters and Turtles. The labor unions and the environmentalists and, like, the sort of the social left all kind of coming together to in large ways agree upon, like, hey, this capitalist imperialism is working against all of us and is detrimental to our futures. And now we're finding maybe that the labor unions are a little hands-off and hesitant about participating in, like, environmental and social issues and so forth. What do we? Is that strategized by the labor unions, or is this just we have too much else on our hands, or is it why is that, and what can we do to change it to bring them back around?
That was one of the reasons why Jobs with Justice National. I always say make sure that I'm Cleveland Jobs with Justice, because if it's Jobs with Justice, that's the national office. So we do have coalitions across the country, but that was originally why they started Jobs with Justice. And as I said, we're the street heat of the labor movement. We bring together community and the faith community organizations and the faith community to be able to work on labor issues, and then vice versa, that the labor then supports the community organizations. And I think, again, it's education to know, hey, if we're all moving towards the same goal, that together we're stronger. I used to be a national organizer, and I always say Cleveland, Ohio is the bane of my organizing existence because we divide and conquer ourselves. Instead of coming together and fighting for the cause. And so I think that we need to do that more with the different organizations and groups. So that's something that I think we really need to work on. I think one of the main issues in Cleveland, it seems like, if you have, again, I'm an organizer. If I have a target, I'm going to go on that target. I'm going to stick with that target. I don't care who you are. We're going to stick to it until either you do what we want or you go away. And a lot of times people here are like, oh, well, we went and did the protest, and I'm looking at Sam, and he won't do what we want, so we're done. So I think that's one of the things that's been very frustrating, is in watching it. We do it everywhere. It's not just here, but we do it all across this country. We need to join together.
I was just thinking, and did a quick Google, which I guess it's yes and no, depending on where you're at. But, like, I think about what a powerful tool for real world change it could be if unions, for example, the UAW, pressured their union brethren who work for Lockheed Martin to say, not one more dead Palestinian kid. We're not making these things anymore until you stop using them to murder people. The union labor movement could stop the genocide by just walking off the job.
You have to be careful with that, because if you're under contract, there's a no strike clause in most of the contracts. So you only get to strike when the contract is expired. So you have to be a little careful with that.
I'm in favor
That's
of a
the
general
apprehension.
strike, so I have
Me too,
I have
let's
no
do it.
qualms about saying that.
There's a book, No Contract, No Peace, that's published by Labor Council that talks about alternatives to strikes.
Yeah.
And what's legal, what's not. It's been people push the balance and figure out what's what.
Yeah, I have a really good friend who has now retired from the UAW, but she was always one of the troublemakers, and she was part of UAWD even as a retiree, and we were always talking about a general strike. I mean, they do it in Paris, they do it in France all the time.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
It's
There's Sean Fainsey who's talking about 2020, everybody running their contracts. Strike people, it's not.
Yeah, and there are things that we can do, and not, as you said, that are not technically strikes. We can do informational pickets. We can do a lot of other things. I'm also a really big fan of calling. You know, if you've got a target, you can email all you want, but how much does that disrupt their lives? I always say pick up that phone and make those phones ring, because then they're going to pay attention. So that's one of my favorite tactics, is just like call the boss.
I also think culturally, there's a lot said for building culture within there. As a carpenter, there's a lot of work to be done in our, people aren't even aware of outside labor movement. You're talking about not working well together. Carpenters don't even belong to the FLCIO except for in New York City and in cities. We just don't belong to the local village expenses. I had the impression when I welcome to this area to subscribe to labor citizens agreement. So like, just to help my fellow brothers and sisters see what's out there. But I don't want to veer off the course, but I don't think talk about reforming something.
I think that's such a good comment, and I think like the labor movement is made up of regular people, and I think we'd like to think that it is made up with people who care about the same things that we care about all the time, but it is mostly filled with working people who are trying to pay their bills, to get, you know, their kids to school, like whatever it may be. And like that is where, you know, I like, honestly, I really struggle with this. The Worker Center, we as Deb knows, have tried really hard to be in community with organized labor. Like, and there are some like labor unions, I'll say like SEIU Local 1, they represent mostly janitors, Black women, mostly fill their ranks, and we find common cause. And there's other unions who, you know, don't give us the time of day, and kind of the reason they say is like, that doesn't impact my people. Like, my people care about whether or not they're getting more money in their next contract. Like, what's happening over here doesn't impact them, and so like that's not where their priorities are. And like, I think it just speaks to this broader thing. I think we're all like circling around of like, what is the labor movement and who's in it, and like how do we help build common cause? I mean, I think that was honestly your question there, but like, yeah, I this is like so near and dear to my heart, because I feel like we have struggled so much with this of like, you know, so the Worker Center, we brought together a coalition of mostly community groups. We had a couple of labor groups that joined. It was called the Guardians for Fair Work, to pass anti-wage theft legislation in Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, and Euclid. That work, frankly, mostly benefits the building trades on construction sites. None of them joined with us. And that work was done by women after work, putting their kids to bed. I mean, I get like teary-eyed thinking about it. Like, you know, it was people who are not in the labor movement, but who went to city council, who brought their kids to city council, who on their lunch breaks, I mean, they were like time thefting their work, you know, to like get this done. And it goes both ways. We've got to show up for organized labor too, in the ways that they want us to, you know. But I really struggle with this, and I think it's hard, and I just appreciate you naming that. And yeah, like I feel like talking about like what could we do to end the genocide in Palestine if we like thought of ourselves as a singular labor movement. That's big stuff. Am I going to weep in public? Maybe.
I agree about the changing the cultures.
Mm.
I think within my union we have a committee on public education, or political education. It's strictly about politicians and electoral politics.
Mm.
There's nothing discussed beyond that. And so they'll bring in a politician before a meeting, I'm locally, blah, blah, blah. Never once did they bring in like Black Lives Matter Cleveland or the president to
We have about 5 minutes left, and I kind of circled this one because I wanted to come back to it last because I think it's a good way to end. What parts of the current labor movement are inspirational? What gives us hope?
The workers. That's it. It's the workers. I mean, we always have to remember that this is what it's about. It's the workers. So I think they are what inspire me as a union leader, but that's where we have to put the focus.
Ooh, that's a good one. That's tough to top. That's a really good one. I think that is certainly true. I think I would, just for some diversity, I think like this space is very special that you all have created. I think that like Red Triangle, you're anarchists. Am I right on that?
Not by
Not by
design.
typical
Yeah,
definitions.
yeah.
Some are, some aren't. But like this is a community space of like people who have come together and who are talking about labor issues. I think like this right here is very exciting and interesting to me. You know, groups that aren't typically invited into labor spaces kind of making a home for themselves to talk about these issues. Also, I'm sorry I called Red Triangle anarchist. I didn't know.
Did you have? Was that hand?
I also went to Labor Notes, and it was my first time last month in Chicago. And also, just in my experience organizing rank and file ticket departments locally, I'm 49, everyone's younger than me. So it's not just the workers, but it's the younger workers. And it's really cool to see. Like at Labor Notes, there were a bunch of Sparky babies running around. And but they are organizing the fuck out of the bottom of it. They're doing kind of fun this in this moment, but they've got like 120 at the time, 120-ish people in 9 cities, and they've got a groundswell, and we're seeing how that's possible through the partners. We have 3 locals in Northeast Ohio, and we've got people who nominated 2 of the 3, and we're nominating more a third one on Tuesday. And we've put socials out there, people we met at Labor Notes, and we're getting people fill out our online form from all around the country, all around our international. It's really interesting to see everyone is bright and ready, and it's just a matter of organizing. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of confidence in there.
Yeah.
I've only been organized for 13 years. And I was always looking for the old lefty in the local, and I never really found one guy kind of more of an old liberal. But I'm realizing I'm kind of becoming that guy. It's really cool that I'm finding the people that are down, but we are also navigating like people that are good union guys that are also Trump supporters, and like that is something that going forward is once we pass these elections, get down to the nuts and bolts of it, and it's going to be very interesting to find it, because I know that they will not be. I will be purposely trying to find common ground, common cause, and trying to win them over in subtle ways.
Yeah.
So we can build a team that.
I'm looking at the brother from the Mahoning Valley. And the reason why, when you just said Trumpers, the Mahoning Valley used to be bluer than blue.
50 years.
Yeah.
Never voted Republican.
Yeah, and when I was actually it was our union represents 717 Credit Union, and yeah, good. And I was down there for a meeting or something, and I went to the restaurant close to where the main office is, and I walked in, and this is before the Trump, or this is right as the Trump tide started down there, and I walked in and I see all these MAGA people, and I'm like, what the hell has happened here? Because it never would have happened. But he went in and sold them a bill of goods and said he was going to save Lordstown and didn't do it. So.
But I do think, to what you said, people on every side of everything, and rightfully so, they're pissed off.
Yeah. Meet your communist organizer.
But if you say, you remember when your dad worked at Lordstown and, mom was able to stay home, kids were able to go to college, like, sell it that way, everyone feels how terrible everything is, and there's something to tap into there, and, everyone feels proud, from my experience at least, people want to do something about it. It's just, the time,
Yeah.
effort, and capacity, or even just the education of knowing what's like.
We've lost that collective memory of what we do.
Yes, that is it.
And the fraternal organizations and the bowling leagues and all that stuff, like, we used to come together and build that, like, in some areas, like, meetings were there too.
Yeah.
All right, my friends, we are bumping up against time, and hopefully we can continue this conversation for a little bit, but unfortunately we have to end our talk. I do have to do our video stuff, so information about our speakers and their locals and who they represent and how you can contact them will be in the description of this video. You can find us on Facebook, that's Red Triangle Cleveland on Facebook, and if you liked this video and you liked our content, like the video, share the video, give us a follow, subscribe to our YouTube channel, find our Patreon. We have some excellent stuff to help us fund the purchasing and construction of a in real life, real world, permanent leftist community center here in Cleveland. We are right around $16,000 right now. We've got a long way to go. We could use your help, and we appreciate you watching. And thanks to our speakers.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was nice.